Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. If businesses ever needed a reminder of the importance of cybersecurity, they got it earlier in the month. Internet giants Google, Amazon and Cloudflare revealed they'd blocked a cyber attack, a denial of service attack, that Google said was 7 times bigger than anything seen before. Fortunately, they fended it off, but with more businesses using the cloud to store so much data, it's a salient reminder of the need to be taking cybersecurity seriously, with responsibility going all the way up to board level. Paul Garner is the co-founder and chief operating officer of Australian cloud security platform Plerion, which is a supporter of this podcast. Paul, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Hi, Sean. Great to be here.
So I just talked about that attack on Google, Amazon, Cloudflare. What impact does an attack like that one have in terms of general awareness around the business community?
Yeah, it's a good question, Sean. And I think what it does, given that the organizations who were the subject of that attack are household names, right? Google, Amazon, Cloudflare, it just helps bring the consideration around cybersecurity, how your data is protected, back to the top of the priority list of many people whose data is hosted by these types of organizations. And then for businesses as well, like how well are they geared up to protect themselves from these types of attacks if it were to happen to them?
Okay, so how prepared are we? There's been a bunch of security breaches locally across the past 12 to 18 months, or maybe it's just that we're hearing more about it. I'm just interested, why have there been more? Is it kind of more attackers out there? Is it because we use the cloud more, a greater volume of data? What's the reason?
Yeah, I think the reality, Sean, is it's kind of an amalgamation of all of those things. So there's organizations who have benefited hugely from the transition to the cloud that empowers them as businesses to grow faster without too many barriers and to really empower their developers to bring about the results that the businesses want. So scale faster, get more users, get more customers, have more growth. And one of the unfortunate consequences of that is that security sometimes isn't one of the fundamental pillars with which these organizations are building from day one. So that leaves a situation where attackers know that data might be exposed. And if they go looking for it hard enough, they might find it. And as you quite rightly mentioned, in Australia, we've seen a lot of these kind of issues, especially over the last 12 to 18 months. And my guess is that will only accelerate somewhat.
So Plerion is all about protecting companies' data when it's in the cloud, or helping that data be protected. Are we getting better at doing the right? So I'm sure whatever Plerion or AWS does, it's fantastic, right? But what about us as individuals, as a business? Are we getting better at this, at not kind of making silly mistakes, but often quite kind of everyone understands the mistake people make? But are we getting better at it, understanding it?
I think it's a really pertinent question. And I think principally organizations who do really well understand, and they understand early, that this is always a mixture of people, process and technology in terms of how you equip yourselves to be protected. And most importantly, how you're equipping yourselves as an organization to protect your customers' data. Because principally, that's where the attackers know that the highest value is. So if we're talking about breaches that we've seen in Australia across telco, across insurers, across financial institutions, attackers are always looking, how do we get to the customer data? Because they know that's going to cause businesses the biggest headache. And fundamentally, there's still progress that needs to be made, I think, across the ecosystem where that's concerned.
Is that an education piece?
I think it's an education piece, it's an awareness piece, and it's how senior leadership and boards think about the impact. And when I say the impact, it's easy to think about, well, the average data breach costs companies in Australia $4 million. Like, that's an important headline, but fundamentally, there's always that case at a board level that says, well, if it hasn't happened to us, should we be proactive about investing in the people, in the process, in the technology to ensure that it's not us? And then there's a thought process that says, well, if we're compliant, if we've gone through the ISO certification or the SOC certification process, then we must be secure. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. So there's two elements to it at a board and senior level. One is, how do you buy down on risk? The other is, how do you set your business up successfully to grow without limitations? That to me is one of the key business drivers. And if you haven't baked in the right level of security processes and the technology to underpin it, then that's usually where problems can arise further down the track.
Stay with me, Paul. We'll be back in a minute. My guest today is Paul Garner, co-founder and COO of Plerion. I hesitate to ask this because I'm a non-technical person, but how do you do it? So Plerion as an organisation, how do you help safeguard this data of my business, for example?
So it is a technology play. So Plerion is a SaaS platform that effectively continuously scans cloud environments, whether it be AWS, Microsoft, Google. And not only are we looking for vulnerabilities or misconfigurations or overly permissive resources in the environment, we're looking to bring all of that data together to drive context. Because another thing that organizations are really struggling with, even those who want to have an acute focus on cyber and cloud security, is, well, where do I start? If I'm a huge organization who's got a massive cloud footprint, I could go and find thousands, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of things that aren't actually built to best practice, but they don't necessarily leave my business or my customers' data exposed to risk any one moment in time. So the value proposition of a platform like Plerion is, how do we bring all of that telemetry together to drive context? And context could be, okay, we've assessed your environment. There's an attack path that exists from the internet right through to your customers' data, where you've got PII, PCI, PHI information that you thought was protected, but actually it's not. So it's all about empowering organizations to understand where is the risk right now and take proactive measures around that, because security teams and investment just isn't there for organizations to try and look at every minor little indiscretion by itself. You'd never get on top of things in that way.
Where are you looking? Where are the greatest risks from now? We had the denial of service attack that we talked about at the top of the show. Obviously, that's happening a lot more. But what are the areas that you're seeing criminals effectively tapping into to hurt businesses?
Probably the biggest one that we see, Sean, is around identity and permissions. And more often than not, when you hear about attacks or data that's been infiltrated out of an organization's cloud environment into the hands of attackers, it's because the attackers have managed to implement themselves somewhere into the permission stack. So that's whether there are actual assets in the cloud environment that are vulnerable and overly permissive, or where they've managed to get hold of credentials that allow them into the cloud environment and then give them escalated privileges to go and access things that they shouldn't access. So the identity and permission segment is a consistent challenge for organizations to get right. And monitoring that is really important, and being proactive about, okay, we had users that we don't have anymore. Let's make sure that we delete those users and all associated permissions, as opposed to just kind of leaving them hanging in the embers, because that's where attackers can often find a way in.
Okay, so I'm a business, got 200 people, and I think I've listened to this interview and I think, what do I do? Obviously, call Plerion. That's the short answer, but let's go beyond that. What should I, as a business with 200 people, maybe it's 1,000 people, I think I have to take this more seriously. What's the first step? What's the second step?
Yeah, so the first step genuinely isn't technology, because technology, I don't want to do myself out of a job here, but technology isn't the silver bullet in and of itself. What you need to be able to do is get better visibility first and foremost. So where is the edge of my environment? What assets do exist in my environment? And once you've got that map and it's easy to visualize and understand, then you can start to drill down into, well, where are my users? What are their permissions? What are the vulnerabilities or misconfigurations that exist in the environment? And you can start to then understand, well, if this is what we're working with today, how do we do a moment in time assessment of how effectively we're geared up from a security and compliance perspective? And then how, as an extension, do we then drive to a position where we can do this on a continuous basis? Because in that segment that you mentioned, organizations with between sort of 200 and 1,000 or 2,000 people, these are often organizations, especially in the technology space, that have been growing quickly, have been growing without abandon, because until recent macroeconomic headwinds, that was kind of the playbook. And it just needs a little bit of kind of pragmatism to say, right, let's make sure we understand what we've got. Because there are many stats out there around, I think it's 62% of hyper-growth businesses are actually using security as an enabler for growth. And so that's the mindset I would encourage businesses to have. It's like, we want to grow fast. Actually, we can do that more effectively if we bake security controls and the importance of them into the organization at a design level as quickly as possible, effectively.
Paul, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thank you.
That was Paul Garner, co-founder and chief operating officer of Plerion, a supporter of this podcast. This is the Fear and Greed business interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's best business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.